Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Closing Strong, our weekly series with myself, Tara McGowan, founder and publisher of Courier, and my dear friend and hopium purveyor, Simon Rosenberg. We have a great show for you all today, less than 8 weeks out from Election Day, which we will be closing strong. We're going to talk about the debate this week and how Kamala Harris crushed it and Donald Trump. We're also going to have some really amazing, brilliant guests for a roundtable to talk about Russian disinformation and the very recent DOJ investigation. We're going to have Stuart Stevens, author, political consultant, and senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, and Jiore Craig, an expert in the impact of influence operations and one of the smartest people I know who has advised and continues to advise world leaders and politicians around the world on how to navigate communicating in a really saturated space with misinformation and disinformation. But before we go into that, Simon, how are you feeling this week?
Full of hopium. Hopium is flowing out of the sinks and out of the trees. Kamala Harris just got the job done, right? And in every way imaginable. I mean, she had a job to do. She did it. She was prepared. She was confident. She was strong. She looked him in the eye, right? She made her case that she had to make about her and what she wanted to do for the country. It was an extraordinary performance. It was another extraordinary moment in what has been an extraordinary and historic campaign. Her ongoing performance as a national candidate, coming from a place where she didn't go through a primary, has been incredible and inspiring. Her campaign continues to operate at a very high level, an inspiring level. Look, we're in good shape, everybody. I mean, before even the debate happened, there had been this kind of New York Times poll, which kind of spooked everybody. It was a bad poll. I mean, it was very Republican, way too Republican for where the electorate is. But if you look at all the data, and we got a lot of really good polling after the New York Times poll showing the election, all saying the same thing. The data is doing something that's very unusual, which is it's all pointing in the same direction right now. We have about a 2 to 3 point national lead. We're in better shape in the battlegrounds than they are. Our Senate polling is incredibly encouraging all across the country, and we're outside what's called the partisan lean. And so we were already in a stronger position than them. And we were always, and the core of this program, this core of our series is that we were going to have the ability to end strong, our ability to end strong and close because of our money, because of our volunteers, because of the enthusiasm gap that we have with them, that we were going to be able to close stronger. And now we have this debate where she just kicked his ass and also did so in a way that something that you've been talking about, Tara, created many moments that are going to become a powerful part of our understanding of the debate over the next few days. And so, look, I'm very optimistic. I'd much rather be us than them. But at the end of the day, the most important thing I want to say is, man, is Kamala Harris a really impressive and incredible candidate for president. I'm just so proud of her because she just was given this opportunity, but also enormously challenging moment a few months ago. And she's handled it brilliantly and successfully. And so, hats off to our next president.
Absolutely. And truly, from the moment she did the rebuttal, seconds after the debate between President Biden and Trump ended a few months ago at this stage to now, she's risen to this occasion that she did not plan for, she did not ask for, none of us expected. And she has just over delivered in a way that I agree with you. I'm not only proud of her, I'm so proud to support her. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. And something that really struck me, we actually watched the debate together and did a little pre and post show for a live stream with Stuart, who's joining us later in the show. Watching these things, especially when you've worked in politics and media for as long as we have, you know that there is a performative element to this. You know how prepared the candidates have to be and how much coaching they go through. And, we also know that you can have a bad day and a bad night like any of us, and that can really have a massively negative impact on your campaign. And yet what I was really struck by is that and I have been since she became the nominee, is how much we have seen Kamala Harris trust herself and really be able to be her genuine self and to be able to evoke the real feelings and representation of the American people when she talks about such personal issues like abortion, reproductive rights, and freedom as she did, to the point that she cornered Trump on that issue and watched him flip flop and swerve and unravel around it in real time. And there was no moment of, I got him, or smugness at all, because that's not how we all feel. This is that important. These issues, the stakes of them are that high. What is at stake for our rights and our freedoms, and especially for women, our bodily autonomy? I just felt that she represented that in the most genuine, truest, and most powerful essence of what we hope for a candidate or elected official who seeks to represent the American people to be. And I'm still processing it in a lot of ways, but I was just really, really, really not just impressed, but as you mentioned, proud of it. And as we know, she knew the assignment. She understood the assignment. She didn't just get her points across and what she will do for this country and how she will solve the biggest problems facing us, but she also really baited the shit out of Donald Trump in a way that worked more effectively than it should have for someone who has been at this for a while like he has. But it truly did get him in a position of really, really unraveling and showing his emotional instability and showing his inability to stay on message or to not take that bait when she talked about his rallies.
I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She quoted leaders calling him a disgrace, a word that he often uses.
These dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
It was just absolute masterclass. And to your point, she created a lot of moments that, still a few days later are just now reaching so many of the Americans that are probably not on the fence who they would vote for, but are absolutely on the fence of whether they'll vote or not. And those are the folks that we know actually decide these elections. And so even I got a text message the morning after the debate from my team that just within the night to the morning from the debate, our video clips from the debate from Courier on TikTok had over 3 million views and counting. It was really incredible, and it was really, that's how the majority of people in this country will actually be consuming what happened in that debate for days to come.
Two things about what you just said that I want to reflect on, and one is that I keep coming back this in the aftermath of this idea that she was prepared. And I think this is really important because you can't, and you and I discussed this in one of our appearances together over the last few days, that it's very easy when you're going up against him to get sucked into his ugliness and to let him start to take over the debate. And he tried last night repeatedly, right? I mean, the anchors actually really struggled to keep him under control, and they did a decent job. They didn't do a great job on that. In general,
turning the mic off didn't work, by the way.
Yeah. And so, but they were ready for that, and they were ready for it in a couple ways. One was that her consistent facial expressions through the evening and the way she responded to his lunacy and his madness was among the most powerful things that happened in the debate last night. And those were things that they thought through that, because she needed to look incredulous without looking dour and angry, right? And so they nailed the emotional, to your point, the emotional response, his madness was deeply appropriate, powerful, and she crushed him in the split screen all through the evening. And the second thing that I just have been thinking about a lot is you can't be successful in California without being media savvy and without being, telegenic. And her understanding of the television, TV, media part of the game is unreal. I mean, she's got crazy powerful instincts on this stuff. And it's necessary to defeat him because this is his whole game. He is media savvy. He's a media creation. He paints his face and he dyes his hair and he wears girdles and he's an invented man. He's a fake man, right? a weak man, a baby man, all those things. But so she is operating at a level of the sort of the imagery TV game that is necessary to beat him. And that was, frankly, in retrospect, a very significant weakness for Joe Biden. And it wasn't just Joe Biden's age, by the way. It was also just his understanding of the centrality of these things, which I think you learn from being a statewide elected official in California. Joe Biden grew up in a state where he knew everybody, and he could be successful without having to become deeply sophisticated about the media side of the game. And so, one of the things that I'm really deeply excited about her winning, which we will, and her becoming president, is that we have a very modern leader now, right, who understands deeply, even when she began her campaign with the Beyonce Freedom Song, where she was going deep into this kind of emotional place of music and all that Beyonce represents, right? Embracing this as central to her campaign. She's running a very, very modern race. And the campaign is responding to it. The staff are being lifted up by this, by her savvy and by her aggression or her aggressiveness. And I think this is critical in order for us to win. Right. I mean, this is not just about, this is and as somebody who grew up like you did in the TV news business, I'm just she's got game, man. And it is powerful and she knows it. And they now are learning, her team is learning how to build a campaign around that. And I think it just is another reason why I'm so optimistic that we're going to kick his ass over the next couple of months.
Yeah, she and her campaign absolutely understand you don't have to just win the debate with the media and the pundits. You have to win the internet. And one of my favorite split screens that has gone viral is her like this.
Oh
And
my
him
God.
looking so angry, you can almost see the smoke coming out of his ears, the cartoon character with his red face, and her composure versus his emotional chaos. That is the visual contrast. That is the actual contrast between these two individuals. And to your point, preparation, I want someone prepared to be president of this country and leader of the free world and the strongest advocate around the world for democracy. And she is that person, and she was nothing short of presidential. It's been just really inspiring to watch. So there's everything has been said. Will continue to be talked about this debate. If there may or may not be another debate, we don't know yet. They've both sort of been on the fence about it. I think the Harris campaign has been like, yes, let's go. And Trump was saying, I think I heard him say after the debate that, only people who lose a debate want a second debate, not that debate. And, just anything out of his mouth, really, he's trying to project. But whether or not there is another debate, we still do have 7 weeks and change left. What do you think both campaigns need to really, really focus on coming out of this debate?
Well, one thing that I also think happened in the preparation for the debate is that they advanced really important new language and ways of talking about him that were new and powerful. And it's clear that during this preparation, that new things came out. When you throw things against the wall, you practice. This is why. And so, for example, the line that she used, that 81 million Americans fired you in 2020.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
Oh man, did I have like that? For me was a moment, because it was playing on the "you're fired." I mean, there was brilliance to that line in so
And
many
that he's
ways.
still processing it. Oh, that was
Right.
such a chef's kiss.
Yeah. And there were many moments like that. I mean, to your point about moments, you've been talking about this a lot over the last few days. There are so many moments. There weren't 2 or 3. There were 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 moments that they created themselves, right? That were new and new formulations. And I've been saying this, that Kamala is the most effective counter to Donald Trump that's emerged in the Democratic Party over the last 9 years. And she told us why, right? That she faced people like him in court, that she prosecuted people like him, that he was familiar to her. She had defeated people like him in her own life. And I think that when she told us that the very first time she spoke as the new candidate, and began her remarks with a reminder about all of that. It was a really powerful moment in the evolution of her candidacy, because what she was telling us was like, she's got this. Like, she's not spooked by this crazy guy, that she understands him and she's going to go beat him. And so I think that part of, in terms of the close, what also happened in the debate was that she's now found new weapons and new tools to beat him that she didn't have before through the preparation of this debate, that I think are going to, again, make it more likely that we win. And I just want to, again, as somebody who's been in the business like you, like, hats off to Kamala and the team for continuing to innovate, to continuing to find new words and new images and new ways to describe the import of the moment that we're in, right? To sort of help us understand the gravity and the stakes of what's in front of us without terrifying everybody, right? To your point about bringing us in as opposed to pushing us away. And she was great at that last night. So I think part of what happened with this debate is we've been given collectively, all of us, much new and powerful words, rhetoric, language, tools to self describe him and to also make the case for her. I mean, she was so good and so detailed on so many complex issues last night, right? And helped all of us understand more powerfully where she wants to take the country. So we all became much stronger last over this debate. The party, all of us who are in the game, helping her. And so, I remain very optimistic. I mean, I think in terms of what everyone has to do, it's just hard for me to see how Trump can change the trajectory of the election right now, which was already slipping away from him and now which is further away. And this kind of virtuous cycle that we're going to have where we're going to raise all this additional money and reach more voters and more money will come in. And he's going to start having even more significant financial problems and motivation problems and defections on his side. We're going to have a virtuous cycle. He's going to enter a vicious cycle, I think. We felt this way, though, in 2016, right? I mean, there was sort of no way that Trump could derail Hillary's strength, and then Comey intervened and helped change the election. And I think we've learned our lesson on this, that we can't take our foot off the gas. And she had a great new line last night, which was,
hard work is good work, and we will win. We will win.
I'm putting that in my post today at Hopium. And she reminded us, and even in an email she just sent a few minutes ago, she's like, look, debates don't win elections. We got to go win the election now. And so even her language around, look, that was good, but now we got all this other stuff we got to go do, right, was, pitch perfect and kind of amazing. And I do want to sort of express, I think both of us in our own way are expressing our admiration of the unbelievable skill that we're all sort of witnessing with our own eyes in being professionals in this business. They're kicking ass, man.
I also just can't miss an opportunity to give a shout out to all of the women and girlfriends watching or listening to this who have been underestimated in big and small ways before. I think Kamala Harris was deeply, deeply underestimated by all sorts of folks. And so there is a little bit of an element of joyful surprise. And yet I think that there are tens of millions of women across this country who are like, yeah, exactly. This is an experience that so many of us share. And there is something sweet about watching it play out in this way, and to see her really, really, really be in a position that is aligned with her purpose, her experience, and her potential. And she ended her thank you remarks when she said, hard work is good work, which, by the way, is very in line with this sentiment that I'm sharing. She ended those remarks to Taylor Swift's The Man, which is a deeply favorite song of mine. And also, Taylor Swift is the biggest superstar on this planet, who took it upon herself without any warning to the campaign to endorse Kamala Harris and Tim Walz following the debate in a post that said she had watched the debate. She does her research. Everyone's job is to do their own research and make their own choice, but that she had made a choice to vote for this ticket. It was an incredibly eloquent post. Everyone should read it if they haven't. I'm sure most folks have. It got like 5 million likes within a few hours, I think, as anything by Taylor Swift would. She included a link to register to vote in her Instagram story, which I'm sure the numbers are going to be incredible for. And, again, this election is going to be carried by women. And now, really, for the first time, from the very, very, very top of the ticket down to the least politically engaged women voter in the battleground states, there's just no question about it. And it's just, on a personal note, a really, really exciting thing to be witnessing and experiencing right now.
This conversation is so important and timely. It's in my view that the West has been very slow in responding to the tactics that Russia, the information influence and hybrid war tactics that Russia has been using to influence our domestic discourse. It's my hope that together we can start developing a far more comprehensive response as a country to the manipulation of our information ecosystem in America, and that this is an important part of our series together, Tara, in terms of helping. We're living in this new information world, and I think that we've been behind the eight ball a little bit. We've been behind in understanding the nature of the conflict that we're really in today. So we've got these two phenomenal guests, and to set the context, is the reason we're doing this is that the Department of Justice and our government more broadly has really taken an unprecedented step to start countering the influence of Russia in our domestic discourse, even pointing out these influence operations where prominent conservative commentators are being paid extraordinary amounts of money through a Russian cutout, through a cutout organization, to continue to push pro-Russian and pro-Trump propaganda. We've never really had this kind of smoking gun kind of stuff before, and it's created an incredible conversation in our in the information ecosystem and politics about the nature of Russian influence and penetration of one of our two political parties. And so that's the context in which we're discussing. And Jiore, I know that you work on this, you work with governments. I mean, just reflect on what you've seen over the last few months and how you think our government is now seemingly approaching all this in a slightly more offensive and aggressive position than they have been in the past.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, I was really encouraged by the announcement from the DOJ last week. I think that we saw Russia play in the European elections earlier this year. We knew what was coming, and it was a question. It was a question on whether we were going to have any offensive or if we were going to have any public statement to the public about what was coming, in part because we know the public does not always listen or understand the full dynamics of foreign relations and national security in that capacity. We know that foreign relations are often not a top voting issue, so sometimes it can be a cost benefit on what we're talking about in the limited time we have ahead of the election. But I think it was so important that they did talk to the public and make it clear just exactly what's going on. And in the case of tenant media, you have Russia picking conservative influencers because of what they're talking about, to make sure they keep talking about what they're talking about and then add in some very specific talking points that serve Russia. It's pretty extreme when you look at what, for example, Tim Pool was saying. It's saying that Ukraine is the enemy of the United States.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine.
That blatant. And I'm really happy that there was an opportunity for the government to lift this up and point it out to increase the chances that the public is aware that this goes on. Unfortunately, after 2016, there really was not easy ways to show the public some of this Russian interference, because so much of it was behind the scenes, as happens with influence operations. Very hard to get to attribution, very hard to capture, very hard to put into a chart in a compelling way. And I think the public tuned out a little bit after there was so much bluster around what happened in 2016. And now this is just so clear cut. And I only hope that we keep talking about it in ways that reach people where they are online, podcasts, radio, in a format they actually are hearing, because we know that the existing media space is so bifurcated.
Jiore, I actually want to dig in more about exactly who was paid and why we think that was, and those tactics and how Russia has evolved their tactics. But before we do that, I want to zoom out. And Stuart, really, this is not actually the first time, right, that Russia has intervened in a presidential election. It won't be the last time. It really does feel increasingly like in our political elections in the United States that foreign actors, and especially bad actors, are playing more and more significant roles and are actually much more closely entrenched, as evidenced with this investigation, but also Donald Trump's, some of his statements and his positions that he reasserted last night on the debate stage, or this week on the debate stage. And I would love for you to help us sort of understand the context of the relationship and how it's evolved between the Republican Party and Trump in particular and Russia, and the role that they are playing and why in this election.
Thanks. It's a real honor to be here. By context, there was a whole generation of us who were drawn to the Republican Party by Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Berlin Wall, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the beating heart of the anti-Soviet Union, stand up to communism element of American politics was the most conservative part of the Republican Party. Cut to today. The pro-Putin element of American politics is the most conservative element of the Republican Party. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. This would be sort of like Churchill's party becomes the not just German, but Nazi party. So how did this happen? I think one of the under-discussed aspects of this is how much American conservatives admire Russia. And they look at Russia and they see this as a country in which there's only white men in charge. There are no gays in Russia, as Putin says. They see them all as this myth that they're all Christians. First of all, you think Putin's a Christian, you're insane. Secondly, as a huge Muslim population and non-Christian population. They see it where elections are performative, but not decisive. And they like that. And we shouldn't underestimate that. In all the presidential campaigns, I worked in 5 of them, there was always a lawyer, usually in our case it was Ben Ginsburg, who would stand up and would tell people the rules of the road, one of which most striking would be if you're contacted by anyone from foreign, an adversary, or even an ally, you should immediately let us, the lawyers, know, and we will immediately, if appropriate, go to the FBI. I mean, it's just incredible to think that going back to 2016, there was over 100 contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians. And bringing in Paul Manafort. I mean, Paul, I've known forever, right? I mean, Paul was a pirate. He was out there under the Jolly Roger. He would have taken offense if you had said, like, this is someone who's really operating in an ethical way. He would go, wait, come on, buddy. And he was in that cesspool of oligarch money that was all over Eastern Europe. And he tried to bring a lot of people into it, tried to get my firm to work in those elections, offered us millions of dollars. So there was no pretense that when Trump brought in Manafort, he was bringing in a Russian agent. And what did they do? And they changed the platform to be more pro-Russian, less support for Ukraine. And I think that we have to look at this as the most successful covert operation in history, probably, certainly modern history. So what did they get? Putin supported Trump. Trump won. What did he get? Vastly more than they could have ever imagined. They got not just an individual here or there, they got a party. So now the Republican Party, to a large degree, its foreign policy is pro-Putin and standing up with Viktor Orban. I mean, think about that. Of all the Western leaders to say you were admired by, to pick Viktor Orban as Trump did last night. And yes, there still is this other element, Lindsey Graham and these people, but they're being completely compromised by the fact that they are supporting Trump. And you can't do both of those. You can't say that you're pro-American, you want to stand up to Putin and support the candidate who, even before he's elected, as he says, will surrender Ukraine to Russia. And there's a whole story here about money. And we've never gotten properly exposed the degree to which Russian money went into the NRA. And there were vast sums of money that went into the NRA. And there was this scandal with this woman who was named as a spy and all of this.
The Justice Department announced the arrest of a Russian woman on charges that she conspired to act as an agent of Moscow to influence American politics.
Despite a ton of reporting on Russia and Maria Butina and the Russian efforts to infiltrate and influence the NRA, we never ultimately heard of what became of that reported FBI investigation into whether part of what was going on with the NRA is that Russia was using the group to funnel foreign money into the 2016 election to help Trump.
But trust me, this went much deeper. So think about that. That's one of the key constituent elements of the Republican Party, which was compromised by Russian money. And it goes just a lot deeper than people realize. And I think that it's extraordinarily dangerous for the country. And hopefully now it's being exposed.
Well, can I just jump in? Is that the way that I try to understand this in my head is that the way that the Republican Party treats Russia today is the way they treat the Chamber of Commerce or some other large constituency group that has a lot of money that helps fund their campaigns and help them win, and also has an agenda that they have to respond to. And it's like they're one of the 2 or 3 biggest constituency groups that Republicans have to both profit from and then also be obedient to when they have demands on the other end, like any powerful force. And I think that, to me, in the last few weeks, one of the things that has been most shocking in the evolution of this 9-year journey that Trump has been on with his Russian allies is that 2 weeks ago, the GOP on their social media had a screenshot of the 5 leaders of the Republican Party today. And they were Trump, J.D. Vance, Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, and Elon Musk, all of whom have been unbelievably enthusiastic pro-Putin propagandists in the last few months. And it was like an announcement by the Republican Party that they were now fully the party of Putin and not the party of Reagan any longer, like that the capture had become complete. It wasn't just a signal that was sent during the Republican convention in 2016 that, we wanted to play ball in Ukraine. This was a loud, glaring, bright, light out to Putin that, the capture had been complete and they were ready to play. And I guess that gets me to my next question, Jiore, is that what does it mean that if Russia's going to escalate here and if they're going to fight for their guy in the next couple months, what would that look like?
Well, we know that much of what they do will look like fanning the flames of what's already happening in our country. They will find ways to make talking points that suit them, whether that is, for example, the way the conservatives talk about DEI programs, the way the conservatives talk about what's going on with the border, the way conservatives just in general try to make another group of people other. That's very authoritarian playbook, very strategic. They will fan the flames of that. They'll do that across platforms. They'll do that in ways that are very hard for researchers or journalists to evidence. They can make financial transactions behind the scenes that are not, transparent in any way. When you're in your news feed, you would swipe right by it. You wouldn't suspect it. It would look like business as usual. They are also very likely, as we've seen them do in other places, blending into other spaces. So not the overt conservative talking points, but they are blending into online spaces where voters are, perhaps Black voters, perhaps diaspora voters, perhaps voters that have a certain in-group language. And when they're in those spaces, they're saying all types of things. Some of those things might sound progressive, some of those things might sound neutral, and they can pivot at any time to a message that says, you know what, don't bother turning out. You know what, just stay home. It's not worth it. What is this system? It's broken. And we know they will do that. And they'll say it in an encoded language, in language that looks and feels like it belongs in that online space. And that's really challenging. They will also continue to co-opt influencers. And when there's an influencer that they like, they will continue to double down on them, help those people get more reach. That's really challenging because that influencer might have and hold some of those opinions. And it's difficult to call out the American influencer for being co-opted when maybe they also believe what they believe. And that's where this gets really tangled up. And in general, I think that, last night at the debate, we saw really in a blatant way, I was kind of surprised how blatant Trump was in saying, I've got the hookup. I've got the hookup with Russia. And of course, the wind's going to be at my back. And whether or not I win or whether or not I'm actually in office, like I can make things happen. I wish someone would have said, why, if you can make things happen, why haven't you stopped the war already? And it's just all of this sort of very overt, obvious co-opting of the Republican Party, as you say, and there just really isn't enough strategic direction pointing at that activity in a way that's compelling and really breaking through to Americans. And in the meantime, it allows Russia to sort of continue to run some of these operations undetected. I mean, in the case of Tenet Media, it depends whose story you believe, but it wasn't very hard for them to do what they did. They didn't face really any barriers. They used photoshopped resumes. They didn't have to work very hard. And so, the same thing when the Voice of America, which was Russia doing a very similar doppelganger exercise in Europe earlier this year in the Czech Republic, when that came out, people were asking, well, how much impact did it have? And how do we really know why they would spend their money on something like this? That's the one we found. That's the one that they felt was worth at least, a couple $100,000s. It is likely there are many more.
Yeah.
It's likely there are many more that we can't find. And now we don't want to. I've worked in Eastern Europe for a long time. I've worked in countries where the public is very tuned in to how state actors operate. I think the case of the Polish elections are an amazing triumph in this sense, and that's something anyone who wants some hope should look up. But we don't want to turn into a country where you're doubting every piece of information that you get, and we're already in that a little bit. And so a message, out to the people who are thinking, well, how do I know? How do I spot it? It's not so much that I would expect to spot it. It's more that I would try to make the content in your feed really earn your trust. Look for that transparency information. Try to really understand who's behind what you're seeing and think through who benefits from me believing in this piece of information. Because if you can kind of think about the motives with a quick dotted line to, who benefits when, Trump, who's got the Putin hookup, wins this election and who doesn't.
I can just share one personal example. Back in the Brexit days, I got a call from an English political operative who wanted me to come over and help with debate prep on these Brexit debates they were having, which I thought, I didn't really think about it much. I thought, well, this could be cool. I don't know, go to England. Could be, I hadn't really focused on it. And as I went down this path with them, it became really clear to me that the money that I would be paid with was coming from Russia. And we now have seen exposed how much Russian influence there was in Brexit. And I just think there's so much more of that out there than we have realized. Look, I backed away. I mean, as soon as I had any contact with Nigel Farage, I realized he's like one of the creepiest guys I'd ever met in my life. So it was a very easy choice.
And you thought to ask, Stuart. A lot of these content creators, right, have claimed ignorance, whether that's true or not.
They weren't really trying to hide it. And I just think that the degree to which this money is floated around the party, and in a post, Citizens United way, it is so easy to do this, that I think it would take a full-on sort of 9/11 Commission study to get to the bottom of this, and would prove that the Republican Party, the irony is, the Republican Party has become everything that McCarthyism accused the Democrats of being. But this case is actually true. And I don't frankly see where it's going to improve from within the party. There's no center of gravity that will say, wait a second, let's don't do this. Because they've all compromised themselves into supporting Trump.
And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the tactical side of how they spend and deploy the money, because that also seems to evolve and just sort of meet the demands of the decentralized media environment we're in. And Jiore, you are always the first person I text or call when I want to understand if something is moving more quickly, if it's already done the most damage because I'm hearing about it, and who has the most influence online, especially in spaces that certainly the traditional media does not pay attention to or report on enough. And so, Tenet Media was really just kind of a pass-through entity, right, of this Russian money. They didn't have massive audiences of their own. They delivered this money to far-right influencers, content creators like Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, others. Can you have done so much work on this, and also were very involved in the 2020 election. I know focused on disinformation. Can you give just a little bit for our viewers of context for who these folks are and why they were such useful idiots, essentially in this operation?
Sure. So to understand what happened, you have to understand the online apparatus that the conservatives are using all the time to reach voters. it can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking that it's just two echo chambers where Republicans hear one side and Democrats hear the other side. That's not really how the online landscape is functioning right now. First of all, you have the majority of Americans on Facebook, even though that seems like that trend is old, it's not. They're still majority on Facebook. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. Some of them, around 22%, are on Twitter. Certainly, Twitter is full of sort of opinion influencers, as we would say in public opinion research. But they're kind of all over the place. And depending who you are, you're getting personalized recommendations, usually not based on your news or political interests, right? The majority of people are not news seekers, they're seeking relief from news. So think of people sort of floating out there, getting information on their different platforms. Now enter these conservative influencers. What is their relevance? Well, each of them, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, they've found ways to either hack the platforms and hack the algorithms to get their content to move further. So that's using really blockbuster headlines, that's using different growth hacking tactics over the years to build their followings. And it's not to say, these are very, very conservative, very explicitly conservative influencers. It's not to say that that content is not getting in front of average voters because of the way that it can be recommended, because of the way that they will sort of interweave, sort of cultural commentary into what they're doing. For example, a lot of commentary on dating, relationships, manhood, the common woman. We're hearing so much about how women should be in this election. And that gets them sort of the boost of, the algorithm and the platforms looking at it and saying, okay, that's a relationship piece of content. Let's send this to anyone who's gone through a breakup. Or, they're talking about leadership and they're talking about coaching. Let's, send that to the self-improvement crowd. So they make up just a small fraction of the very successful conservative online apparatus that has dominated in many ways online spaces since I'm going to say Obama's second term. I mean, me, Tara, I've said this 100 times. The pro-democracy actors were behind in 2016. So part of the story was that Russia interfered, and part of the story was that the pro-democracy actors did not keep up with evolutions in the information ecosystem. And in the meantime, the conservative apparatus did, and they made very strategic business decisions in how they were going to set up media companies and set up media apparatuses that were going to be able to absorb the changes to the information environment. So Benny Johnson and Tim Pool represent that. They're two people who kind of in different ways for different reasons were successful, had different versions of help. Benny Johnson, long relationships with wider conservative ecosystems like the Turning Point USA ecosystem, the Charlie Kirk ecosystem. And what it shows us about a lot of these players is while they may have gotten in because they were some sort of like intern at a conservative convention where they were geeking out about, who knows, being mad about maybe the status of their relationships in high school, they are now there and they're really, getting a huge payout. And I think it's important for viewers to think through, are they talking about the issues that are important to me or are relatable to my life? Are they talking about childcare? Are they talking about the economy? Or are they really kind of repeatedly bringing up these other points that seem to be based on their agenda or an agenda they have, or perhaps a paycheck they're getting?
I can just share, if I could. In 2012, Romney in that third debate famously came out and named Russia as the major geopolitical foe.
Well, this is to Russia. This is, without question, our number one geopolitical foe.
Now, because it was an election and a lot of stuff, he was attacked for it by Democrats. A lot of the media scorned it. But what hasn't ever really been talked about is inside the Republican Party, there was not a cheering squad for Romney saying that. And they kind of kept quiet about it because it was sort of a skins and shirts thing. And if our guy's going to be for this, we don't want to attack it. But I was on the receiving end of numerous phone calls from conservatives saying, why are you doing this? Russia is our friend. And, the reality is nobody cared. It wasn't going to change anybody's vote. This wasn't something that Mitt was saying because, we tested it. Before that foreign policy debate, we even did a poll that showed that of those who thought that foreign policy was in their top 10 issue, it was less than 7% of the country. So, it wasn't any sort of opportunity. Romney just believed this and said it. But that to me was this like very troubling early warning sign. Like, what? what they're calling, like trying to get Romney to back off of Russia. And it, I think, just was very prescient on what was to come.
We have a lot of work to do here to both understand and more effectively respond. And also, as Tara does every day, to go on offense, right? I mean, it's not just about response, I should say. It's about going on offense, being louder, making our case.
Yeah, in the interest of relevancy, because we know that's exactly how these operations work and content creators work to get into the bloodstream and the news feeds of individuals who aren't paying as much attention. Jiore, because you're such an expert on this, what are some things that people that are listening can do when they are sort of floating around in their echo chambers, et cetera, and encountering things of this nature, or more importantly, probably to be more proactive and offensive?
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to engage with content that is fact based or even just content you find compelling that is telling this story in a way that you think is relatable to people in your life. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to do so on multiple platforms. Whether you are forwarding a chain email to the older loved ones in your life, whether you are DMing 10 people when you see a really compelling Instagram reel that is explaining a complicated topic, it is so important because that is how that content is going to go further and get the automatic amplification. And I think you know better than anyone, Tara. We've seen the platforms actually opt people out of political content this year. So they've opted you out, and unless you opt back in, which, as I said, it's not likely people are like running to opt themselves back into the political commentary happening in our country, they're not getting that information. And so this is a conversation. I mean, I think all of us are unique in that we care a lot about foreign relations, foreign policy. We know that that's just not necessarily where the rest of the country is. However, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, it's my belief that Putin over-indexed on how much he could count on the anti-woke sentiment directly translating into support for him. I think he miscalculated that because there were a majority of Americans that said, we are pro-Ukraine, we know where we stand in this. And while they have been chipping away, and while you might not be able to say the same thing about the majority of the Republican Party, Americans actually do understand. They do understand where we stand on this, and they do understand which side stands for freedom. And so, assuming that people are following along, assuming that people are reading long op eds is the wrong assumption. You have to assume that no one's reading anything about this, no one's heard about it, and you have to find short, compelling ways to repeatedly talk about the things that are important to you in this election, whether it's this story or something else. You have to repeat yourself many times in order to break through. And that's something that Russia knows conservatives do really well. So all they had to do was wire $400,000 a month to some of these creators to get them to just keep on doing what they're doing because they just repeat the same talking points always. So I would really compel anyone who considers themselves informed, considers themselves someone who can influence anybody in their lives, to really think through what that influence is going to look like over the next few months, because we're running out of oxygen and it will get filled with the bad actors trying to undermine the elections if it's not filled otherwise.
Thank you so much, Stuart and Jiore, for joining us for this.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you both.
Thank you again, Jiore and Stuart, for joining us today. Simon, thoughts on that conversation? I feel like we really could keep it going.
Yeah, listen, I'm really glad the way this series we're doing together is evolving. It's a great mix of political leaders, timely topics, things that really matter, a focus on the information space, which is something we desperately need and something you're particularly expert in. I think this is a really important. So first of all, I'm having a lot of fun. I think this has been great. And I also just am very optimistic about where we are. I mean, I feel like we are in a moment that feels like there's so much promise. And, Kamala Harris is become an inspiration for all of us in ways that I think that we weren't really expecting. I mean, she's a person who's been given a moment in history, and she's really risen to this moment in a deeply powerful, necessary, important way for our future, for our democracy, for our freedoms. And, I'm just feeling like, as a warrior in this battle to preserve our democracy, this has been a really good week for us. We have a lot of weeks ahead of us if we're going to go win, but we got to take the wins when they come. And watching Donald Trump become the blabbering, mess puddle on the floor that he was last, in this debate was deeply gratifying. And she smoked him, and he needed to be smoked. And so she's done a big thing for all of us in so many powerful ways. So I leave this conversation and this video talk today really optimistic about what we can do and very determined to go win this thing, with all of you.
It's interesting. I'm feeling from all of our conversations over the past few hours that this episode was a little bit of a microcosm of the two big truths we all have to carry over the next 7 weeks and change, which is that there is enormous opportunity and optimism and joy and momentum in this race and potential. And there is a lot that we still need to do and be clear-eyed about, and we cannot rest on the laurels of our hope or our optimism either. We have to do the work. We all have to do the work and know that there's just, it's going to take everyone every single day, and we can end with Kamala Harris's wonderful sentiment after her debate performance, which is hard work is good work. And we should all be proud and energized to keep doing it. And I certainly am. And I know you are too. So thank you for another great episode. We are going to close strong, Simon.
We are closing strong, and we've got, early vote starts next week. It's early in-person voting. The election's here. There's then 46 days of voting that comes after that. And, I'm looking forward to working hard with all of you and getting this done. It's what the American people need, and it's why we're here.
Nothing makes me feel more hopeful than when people start voting. Voting season. All right. We will see you all next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tara.